I never believed in superstitions, let alone urban legends. But what happened to me on Valentine's Day 3 years ago changed my perception of everything. I was driving home late after a long shift at the restaurant where I worked. The road was nearly empty, just an occasional car passing by. It was a foggy night, the kind where the mist swirls in front of your headlights, making everything feel unreal. My girlfriend had been waiting for me, and I was eager to get home. As I turned onto a dimly lit road that cut through a dense forest, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the trees, a woman in a tattered red dress. I slowed down, my heart pounding, thinking she might need help. But as my headlights fully illuminated her face, I felt a chill race down my spine. Her eyes were completely black, empty voids staring straight at me. I hit the gas, speeding away from that cursed spot. But a strange sensation clawed at me. I could feel something in the back seat. I adjusted my rearview mirror, and there she was, sitting in the back, her black eyes fixed on me, my breath caught in my throat, my hands tightening on the wheel. The car felt suffocating, the air thick with something rotten. My vision blurred, my ears ringing with a whisper that wasn't there before. "You shouldn't have left me," a voice echoed, though her lips never moved. I swerved the car, nearly crashing into a tree, my body shaking violently. But as soon as I regained control, she was gone. The only thing left was the scent of old roses and decay. When I finally made it home, my girlfriend was waiting at the door, concern written all over her face. I told her what had happened, expecting laughter or disbelief, but her face paled. She pulled out her phone and showed me a local legend about a woman named Clara, who was left at the altar on Valentine's Day and later found dead in that very forest, wearing a red dress. My blood turned to ice. That night, I barely slept, haunted by the feeling that she was still with me. And I was right. The next morning, a single wilted red rose lay on my pillow, the faint scent of decay still lingering in the air. From that day on, strange things kept happening. The lights flickered whenever I thought about her, and I often woke up gasping for breath, feeling invisible hands pressing against my throat. My girlfriend started noticing shadows in the corners of our apartment, whispering voices when no one was there. One night, I woke up to find her standing in front of the mirror, staring blankly at her own reflection. When I called her name, she turned, and for a split second, her eyes were pitch black, just like Clara's. I grabbed her, shaking her until she snapped out of it, her confused expression mirroring my fear. We decided to move out, thinking a change of scenery would help, but it didn't. The first night in our new apartment, I woke up to see Clara standing at the foot of our bed, her dress dripping wet, her hollow eyes watching us. My girlfriend screamed, and just like that, Clara vanished. The next day, our front door was wide open, though we had locked it. The scent of dead roses filled the air, stronger than ever. It was as if she was letting us know she wasn't done with us yet. Years have passed, but I still feel her presence. Every Valentine's Day, I find a single wilted red rose on my doorstep, no matter where I am. The whispers in the dark never stopped, and sometimes, in the mirror, just for a moment, I see those black, endless eyes staring back at me.
Valentine's Day had always been a time for love, flowers, and laughter. But for me, it would become a nightmare that would haunt my mind forever. It started innocently enough. I had met someone special, a charming man named Ethan, who seemed perfect in every way. He had kind eyes and a smile that made my heart flutter. We had planned a cozy dinner at his apartment, just the two of us, to celebrate the evening. It was supposed to be a quiet, intimate affair. Little did I know, it would become a night of unimaginable terror. Ethan's apartment was small but beautifully decorated. Candles flickered on the table, their soft glow casting eerie shadows across the room. The smell of roses filled the air, mixing with the scent of a home-cooked meal. We ate, drank wine and laughed, but as the evening wore on, I began to feel uneasy. There was something about the place that didn't sit right with me. The walls seemed to close in, and the air grew thick. I told myself it was just the wine, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. After dinner, we moved to the living room, where Ethan put on some soft music. He offered me another glass of wine, but I refused, feeling the alcohol, already clouding my mind. Suddenly, the lights flickered and the temperature dropped. A cold chill swept through the room, causing me to shiver. Ethan didn't seem to notice. He smiled, his eyes darkening in a way I had never seen before. "You're so beautiful," he whispered, his voice unnervingly low. I felt an icy finger run down my spine, but I forced a smile, trying to brush off the feeling of dread that was settling in. Without warning, the lights went out entirely, leaving us in complete darkness. Panic surged through my chest. "Ethan, what's happening?" I called, my voice trembling. He didn't answer. I could hear his footsteps, but they didn't sound right. Slow, deliberate, as if he were stalking me. My heart raced as I fumbled for my phone, but it was dead. My only source of light was the faint glow of the candles, which now seemed to flicker with a life of their own. I could hear Ethan breathing, his breath deep and uneven. But when I called his name again, there was no response. Then a low, guttural voice whispered in my ear, sending a surge of terror through my body. "You shouldn't have come here." I froze, unable to move, the fear paralyzing me. The voice wasn't Ethan's. It was something far more sinister. In that moment, I realized the truth. Ethan was not who he seemed to be. He wasn't human. The man I had been with was a monster, and I was trapped in his lair. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, and I saw him, Ethan, or whatever he had become. His face was contorted in a grotesque grin, his eyes hollow and dark. His skin was pale, almost sickly, and his mouth was smeared with blood. He stepped closer, and I could hear the sound of my own breath, quick and shallow, as if I were suffocating. I backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The walls seemed to press in on me, and I knew that I was trapped. In the distance, I heard a noise, like the scratching of claws against wood, and I realized that I wasn't alone. With one last scream, I turned to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. The thing that had once been Ethan lunged at me, his cold hands wrapping around my throat. I tried to break free, but his grip was like iron. The world around me began to blur, and I felt my life slipping away. And just as I thought it was over, everything went black. When I awoke, I was lying in the middle of the street, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. The world was quiet. The only thing I could hear was the distant sound of a love song playing faintly from the apartment across the street. It was Valentine's Day. But I knew deep down that I would never be able to forget the horror I had witnessed. As I lay there on the street, my body still trembling from the horrors I had just endured, a haunting thought gnawed at my mind. What had happened to Ethan? How had he become that thing? The answer came to me slowly, in fragments, as if the pieces of the puzzle were coming together after the fact. Ethan wasn't always like that. I learned later that he had been in a tragic car accident years ago, one that had taken the life of his fiancée. In his grief and despair, he had become obsessed with the idea of bringing her back. He dabbled in dark rituals, trying to summon her spirit. But in his desperation, he had unknowingly opened a door to something far worse. A dark force that had consumed him completely. The spirit of his fiancée never returned, but something far more sinister had taken her place. That dark entity twisted his soul, turning him into the monster I had met that night. Ethan's humanity had been slowly consumed over time, until there was nothing left of the kind man I had once known. After that night, I couldn't escape the nightmare. I moved away from the city, trying to outrun the memories, but they followed me everywhere. The terrifying images of Ethan's face, his hollow eyes, the chilling smile, they haunted my every waking moment. I went to therapy, but no one could help me forget what had happened. As time passed, I became a shell of who I once was. My relationships fell apart, and I struggled with anxiety and insomnia. It was as if a dark cloud was always hanging over me, a reminder of the terror I had witnessed. I had changed too. I had seen the dark side of the world, a place where grief, obsession, and darkness could twist the soul into something unrecognizable, and I knew that I would never be the same again. Valentine's Day, once a day filled with love and joy, would forever be a reminder of the nightmare I had survived. I couldn't escape the feeling that Ethan's darkness was still out there, watching, waiting. And no matter how far I ran, it would always find me.
It was supposed to be a perfect Valentine's Day. My girlfriend and I had planned a romantic evening, dinner at a fancy restaurant, followed by a quiet walk through the city's park. But things took a turn for the worse when we arrived at her apartment. As soon as we stepped inside, I noticed something off. The lights were flickering. Not in the usual way. There was a rhythmic pulse to them, like a heartbeat. I laughed it off, trying to keep the mood light, but as I walked further into the room, a cold breeze brushed against my skin. The windows were closed. I turned to her, but she wasn't paying attention. She was staring at something on the wall, something I couldn't see yet. As I stepped closer to her, I saw it. Scrawled across the wall in what appeared to be blood was a message. "You shouldn't have come." Back. My heart skipped a beat. I turned to ask her what this was, but the words caught in my throat when I saw her face. It wasn't her anymore. Her eyes were wide, staring blankly at the wall, her mouth slightly open. She was frozen, like a doll. I rushed to her, shaking her, but she didn't respond. Panic surged in me. I checked her pulse, still alive, but something was wrong, terribly wrong. I grabbed her arm and tried to pull her towards the door, but as soon as I touched her, I heard a whisper. "Don't leave me." The voice came from behind me, but when I turned around, there was no one there. I felt a chill run down my spine. I thought I was losing my mind. My eyes darted around the room, searching for an explanation, but all I could hear was my own ragged breath. That's when the door slammed shut behind me. I turned back to see her, still motionless, her eyes now locked on me. But there was something new in her gaze, an emptiness, a void. It was like she wasn't even human anymore. The walls began to close in, the room shrinking around me. I tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. I felt the temperature drop further, my breath fogging in the air. That's when I saw them. Shadows. Figures moving in the corners of my vision, but whenever I looked directly at them, they vanished. It was as if someone, was watching, waiting for me to slip. The lights flickered again, but this time, the shadows seemed to grow bolder. One by one, they began to take shape. Figures of people, but their faces were obscured, hidden in darkness. I backed away, heart racing, but there was nowhere to run. The whisper came again, closer now, almost in my ear. "Stay with me," it said. But the voice wasn't hers. It was deeper, more menacing. I felt a cold hand rest on my shoulder, and I spun around only to find nothing but empty space. My breath hitched, and I stumbled backward, tripping over a chair. As I fell to the ground, I heard a laugh, a low, distorted sound. The walls seemed to be closing in faster now, the shadows pressing in on all sides. I could feel the weight of something ancient, something evil, wrapping around me like a vice. And then, everything went dark. When I woke up, I was outside her apartment, lying in the snow. My head throbbed, and my body was numb, but I was alive. The apartment building was still there, but it felt different. It looked abandoned. I tried to call her, but my phone was dead. I rushed up to her apartment, but when I knocked, no one answered. The door creaked open on its own. I stepped inside, heart racing, but the apartment was empty. The walls were clean. No blood, no message. It was as if nothing had happened. I searched for her, but there was no trace of her anywhere. It was as if she had never existed. I left the building, my mind spinning, trying to make sense of it all. But as I walked through the streets, I saw something that froze my blood. A Valentine's Day card, crumpled and torn, lying on the sidewalk. I bent down to pick it up. On the front was a photo of me and her, smiling, happy. But when I opened it, the message inside sent a chill through my bones. You were never meant to leave. The handwriting was unfamiliar, and it looked like it had been written in blood. I looked around, but there was no one in sight. I stood frozen, the world around me darkening, knowing that whatever happened that night was far from over. As I stepped out of the building, my mind was in turmoil. The streets, once full of life, now seemed deserted and cold. The card in my hand still trembled, the message written in blood burning against my skin. I walked to a bench in the park, trying to process everything that had happened. But the more I tried to understand, the more the pieces scattered. What had happened to her? Where was she? And more importantly, why was there no one else in that building? Why did everything seem abandoned? As if the whole world had forgotten about her. That was when something strange happened. I felt a presence behind me. Not a physical one, but a sensation. Like her eyes were on the back of my neck. I looked around, but the park was empty. My heart pounded, and a rising anxiety took hold of me. I stood up suddenly, almost without thinking, and ran back to her building, my body trembling with every step. Fear pushed me forward, but it also paralyzed me, making me doubt everything. When I reached the apartment again, I found the door open, just like last time. I didn't think twice and stepped inside, even though I knew it was probably the worst mistake of my life. The feeling of being watched grew stronger with every second. I walked through the rooms, calling out for her, but the only thing that answered was the echo of my own voice. The apartment was completely silent and almost deadly quiet. Then, something made me look at the mirror in the entryway. Reflected in it, I saw her face. She was there, standing behind me, with that same empty, lifeless stare, but now with a twisted smile. I turned quickly, but she was gone. My heart nearly leaped out of my chest. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, but an overwhelming sense of terror consumed me. I knew she was there, somewhere, watching me. And then, everything became clear. The message on the wall, the shadows, the whispers. It wasn't her who had come back home. It wasn't her anymore. Something had taken over her that night. Something evil, using her body as a vessel, as an empty shell. Fear consumed me, but I knew I couldn't run. I had to find a way to end this. The feeling that she was near was unbearable, like the air itself was thick with her presence. Then I heard the sound again. It wasn't shuffling. It was a whisper, soft, coming from the hallway. "Help me," the voice said, and it was hers. The desperation and pain in her voice cut through me. I knew that, no matter how much she was being consumed by whatever had taken hold of her, she was still there, fighting against it. I followed the sound to the end of the hallway, where the bedroom door was slightly ajar. When I pushed it open, I found her lying on the bed, motionless, her eyes glazed over. But something was different now. Her expression was softer, less empty. The darkness that had overtaken her seemed to be fading. "Can you hear me?" I asked. And slowly, she turned. Her head to look at me. It was like she was waking up from a deep nightmare. She looked at me, her eyes now clearer, as if she was coming back to herself. I don't know what happened to me," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Something pulled me into a dark place. I couldn't get out." I stepped toward her carefully, afraid that anything could change at any moment. But this time, there were no shadows, no distorted laughter. It was really her. Slowly, with great effort, she sat up, and I held on to her. There was no explanation for what had happened, but she was back, and it seemed like it was over. Whatever had been controlling her was gone, and she was free. I led her out of the apartment, relief washing over me. As we walked through the streets, the city seemed to return to normal, as if the nightmare had been nothing more than a passing shadow. Over. Time, I never heard or felt anything strange again. She and I tried to move on, but I could never forget what happened that night. And although she had recovered, the truth was that Valentine's Day was never the same for us again. Every year, when that date came around, a chill ran down my spine, and I wondered if she had truly come back completely, or if, in some way, the darkness was still watching, waiting to return. And that's why, whenever someone asks me about that Valentine's Day, I always say, be careful what you wish for. Sometimes what seems like a second chance is just the beginning of something far worse.